Great to see people trickling in. We'll get started right around 8 and give it a couple seconds to let people file into the room. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming today and welcome to today's webinar, Bridging Intergenerational Experiences. I'm Sophia Happen, Assistant Editor at Sage Publishing, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items to review. Attendee microphones have been automatically. However, at any time throughout today's event, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to enter questions for myself and panelists. You can also use the chat feature to communicate directly with other participants and organizers. Just remember to select everyone to share your chat messages with attendees. Closed captions have been enabled. If you don't see the CC icon on your toolbar, you can view captions by selecting the More option on your screen and choosing Show Captions in the drop-down menu. This 1-hour session will be recorded and available to all on the C4Disc YouTube channel in the next few days. Quick note on code of conduct and today's meeting. We are dedicated to creating a harassment-free community for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, religion, or lack thereof, or other group status. C4Disc will not tolerate harassment of or by members or guests of the community in any form. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First off, we have Patty Baskin. Patty is Deputy Chief of Publications at the American Academy of Neurology, where she oversees publication of the 5 neurology journals, along with the CME Journal, News Tabloid, Patient Magazine, and Patient Book Series. She's past president of CSC and a former EIC of Science Editor, and has taught in multiple CSC short courses, serves on several CSC committees, and is a frequent presenter at CSC conferences. Patty is also a member of the SSP DEIA committee and the SSP training committee. And lastly, she is a founding member and next convener of C4Disc. Next up, we have Sai Konda. Sai is an associate publisher in Global Editorial Strategy Publications Division at the American Chemical Society, or ACS. He began his publishing career as managing editor at ACS after graduating with a PhD in computational chemistry from the University of Texas at Austin and postdoctoral research at the University of Delaware. He is currently responsible for the strategic management and financial management of 12 journals in various disciplines in chemistry, having managed over 20 journals in his tenure at the ACS. Sai has been involved with SSP since 2017 and is a previous recipient of the Early Career Fellowship, past co-chair of the Early Career Subcommittee, and a former member of SSP's Board of Directors and Executive Committee. Lastly, Sai is a passionate advocate for science literacy, career advocacy, and STEM education. Last but not least, we have Josephine Shortino. Josephine is editorial director at Canadian Science Publishing, where she manages a team of journal development specialists to grow journals in life and agricultural sciences. She's a graduate of the master's program in publishing at George Washington University and has worked in scholarly publishing since 2000 with publishers and biomedical societies in the management of their specialty journals, including the Canadian Urological Association Journal as their first inaugural managing editor, and the Canadian Medical Association Journal. She's also an active volunteer at her local library and her local literacy group in Montreal, Canada. All right, before we start this conversation, I'd like to provide some context on our goals for today. As many of you know, today's workforce is composed of 4 distinct generations: Boomers, Gen X's, Millennials, and Gen Zs. Each of these generations brings unique experiences, communication styles, and values to the workplace. While these differences can enrich our work environment, they can also lead to misunderstandings and conflicts. Our goal for today is to explore how we can bridge these generational gaps and create a more inclusive and harmonious workplace. We'll delve into how diverse generational identities and life stages influence and shape workplace cultures and dynamics. And our discussion will cover key themes such as recruitment, communication, stereotypes, and varying perspectives and values of each generation. All right, so I'd like to kick things off with our first question and a bit of an icebreaker. Josephine, I'd love for you to start us off, and then Patty and Sai, feel free to jump in next. But what are stereotypes about your generation?
All right. Yeah, thanks, Sophia. And great to be on this call with Sai and Patty. One of the things that I think about when I think about this kind of intergenerational tension is the assumption that the younger folks think that the older folks have something to teach them, or that the younger folks have something to teach the older folks. Like there's this assumption that, oh yeah, I'm here, I know everything, and I'm going to teach you about this. And I think that's a stereotype, and that's not true. At least I haven't found that to be true. I've found it to be very symbiotic, a nice kind of learning from each other feel and spirit behind my relationships and my kind of work and our organizational structure at Canadian Science Publishing. So I think that's a stereotype. Uh, that's I think one that I'd like to start us off with. Mhm.
I'll
Awesome.
jump.
Yeah,
I'll
Patty,
jump in next if you'd like. Yeah, I think the general stereotype that my generation gets, and I'm a baby boomer, right? That we're a bunch of workaholics that work 50-hour weeks. We're in leadership positions. We hold a lot of power, and a huge thing I've heard over and over, which is always surprising to me, is that I'm somehow unapproachable because of my standing. That people can't approach. I'm a leader. I don't have time for others, etc. And also, there is this sense of, from many, that being older, they look at some of some of the things I do, which are a little different. Like they think my writing in cursive is cute. But that's where I often do my best thinking, and scribbling in notebooks, etc., and not just on online thinking. um, and I think sometimes they do think I'm a bit of a Luddite, just not taking time to learn everything because I'm kind of short on patience when it comes to social media. I don't engage in social media a lot. I like to focus on strategy and planning more, and that's where I can use my leadership skills. Um, I think the to dispel, those kind of stereotypes. I think we're a very open generation, and stereotypes can hold that we've gone the way we want, and aren't open. But we've always, the boomers, I think, kind of defined cool and success, and making growing older cooler and trendy, and we wear stylish things, and we want to keep up with everything also that the younger generations are thinking. I mean, we use Copilot and AI like everyone else. So I'll let Sai say something.
Yeah, I guess thank you. First of all, it's great to be on the panel with Josephine and Patty, and you as well, Sophia. Yeah, to speak for the millennial generation, yes, the first words that come to my people's minds when I think of stereotypes is narcissism, entitlement, laziness, and a spending a lot of time on phones and social website, because our generation kind of grew up with the internet. And from a professional point of view, people think that we lack loyalty to certain employers, because there's a stereotype that we jump jobs a lot. But I think the underlying point there is that I think millennials, by definition, or not by definition, I guess it's part of what the generation is like we happen to be proactive in searching for training and career opportunities, and I think that's what kind of leads people to jump different jobs. It's not the lack of loyalty per se, but I think those are the kind of stereotypes that come to mind when we think of millennials.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point there, Sai, about job hopping as being a very millennial stereotype. And I think it's interesting too, because there are different social and historical contexts that influence certain stereotypes or the way certain generations react to things. For Gen Z, a lot of that is COVID. For millennials, you could think about the economy, 9/11, other things, big situational things across the globe that have influenced the way different generations react and what they value. So with that in mind, I would love to know what the biggest challenge was for you when you were entering the workforce and how you possibly overcame this challenge. And Patty, I'd love to get your take on this first, and then we can go to Cy and Josephine.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how many people listening to this today will be able to really relate with me on this, but the workplace before me had basically been a generation of, the senior white males that were in command. So the major challenge for me entering the workforce was that women were being discriminated against. I mean, we were offered jobs with lower salaries. There wasn't equity in salary. We weren't being invited into management. Our mothers all stayed home. Those who did have jobs were considered secondary, to their husbands. They left to raise children. Your husband's job was the primary job. And so why should you be hired to manage something if you weren't always maybe going to quite be there? There weren't that many opportunities for moving upward. So I basically overcame this by really listening to the people talking about women's lib and pursuing the education that I really needed in order to be able to fit into the job I wanted, and then actively seeking that career. But even then, I kind of partly lucked into the job because it was available at the right time. The person hiring me knew somebody else in my network, who vouched for me. So it was a little different than the hiring that happens now when I hire others. So go ahead, Josephine.
No, go. Sure. No, I'll jump in. It's different. For me, I kind of came into this also kind of serendipitously, right? So it wasn't a career path that I had planned out. So I came in it with a lot of self-doubt. I wasn't sure, like the imposter syndrome, although at the time we didn't have a word for it. I know, so, Sophia, Patty, and Cy, we discussed this. So like I didn't have a word for it then, so I thought it was just me, and I was kind of doing my best, and yeah, a lot of self-doubt. And I'm a first generation Canadian as well, so I just felt like either I had something to prove to myself, to my family, and to others, and it was very heavy. Um, and so one of the things I did, like to kind of, you know, get out of this kind of mindset, was I did my homework. So I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of, I asked for help as well. And I just tried to boost my confidence. Like the being prepared helped me become more confident. And understanding that asking for help doesn't make me less than, it doesn't make me anything. It just makes me someone that doesn't know A, B, and C, and so I'm asking for help. So I think just being more comfortable with that really helped along the way. So yeah, that's something that worked for me. Cy, what about you when you first started?
Yeah, I wanted to flip the question a little bit on its head. Before I talk about challenges, I want to talk about opportunities. And, Patty and Josephine just mentioned the what they had to go through to be to grow their professional careers. I think me being a millennial, I think benefited from the contributions that were made in forwarding the society. I think Sophia, you mentioned about how each generation has a lens of seeing how the society has changed year on year. And the fact that me coming from India, the fact that I'm sitting here on a panel is a testament to that opportunity that's been created by previous generations, that I've been able to step out of my home country to find employment and to find professional growth in a country that is miles and well, not even miles, thousands of kilometers away from my home. So that's where there is an opportunity before we talk about challenges. So now if I come to challenges, I think there are two words, I think, which have been mentioned before. One is assumptions. I think Josephine had mentioned this word. I think breaking down assumptions, I feel, is like one of the biggest barriers when it comes to breaking down barriers or addressing challenges that comes with each and everyone's identity in the workplace and what they can contribute. That's one. I think that was because culturally, I came from a different place. I had no idea, what kind of, how things kind of run. So I had to like figure my way out. And what made that journey, I would say, productive, and I wouldn't call it easy, but productive is probably the right word, is the second word. I think Josephine mentioned this. I would just put a word to that, is authenticity, is, being authentic to my true self, not being shy when when I have to say, I don't know what this means. Like I still very vividly remember, um, I had to create a voicemail for my phone when I came to the US for the very first time, and it said pound. I had no idea what pound was. For me, in my mind, it was a hashtag, and so I had no idea why a hashtag was called pound. So not being shy at all to sometimes at an expense of comedic relief to others or at my expense. I was completely fine with it, but I think that authenticity part was very, very critical in making that journey more smoother, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Authenticity. I mean, that's something that I think expands or spans across all generations. Josephine, you mentioned imposter syndrome. Absolutely. I think that's something that all generations can relate to, is this feeling of being on the outside. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you mentioned, Sai, about all of us learning from past generations or the generations that came before us. I mean, Patty, you've talked about so many things that I think a lot of different generations can take away. And one of those things I think that we tend to think about across generations within the workforce is career development. So I'd like to pepper this question. We'll go to Patty, or Patty, who did I leave it off with? Sai, we'll go to Sai. Sai, I'd love to kick off this conversation around career development. So how would you think career development needs differ across generation, or particularly to your generation? And you can speak onto different experiences, perhaps anecdotes. And then around those differences, taking it to a second question, perhaps, how can organizations perhaps address these different generational needs when it does come to career development?
Yeah, if I can start with the career development part, I think I'll go back to my word on authenticity. I think it's important for organizations or wherever individuals are working and volunteering their time, is to make those spaces to enable to grow this authenticity. Like if you're not creating a space where people are free to express their opinions, that's when you're creating biases, whether it's intentional or unintentional, and ensuring that members of all generations are safe to reveal their knowledge gaps. Because if you think about where we are in a workplace, I think it's safe to say that everyone cares about a certain organization where they're working in. So in a way, is everyone has a common goal to do good for the organization. What may vary is the knowledge gap. And even an experienced person can have a knowledge gap. It doesn't mean that if someone has been there in an organization for X years, doesn't mean that so there are different places where that knowledge gaps exist. And that's where when you create a space for the different generations to come together, because knowledge, if one of my favorite things to think about it is knowledge doesn't flow like a waterfall. It doesn't cascade down. Rather, for me, knowledge spreads through, and the more opportunities or the more spaces you create, there is more opportunity for the knowledge to spread through, rather than thinking of it as like one-way direction forced by gravity. So if organizations are able to create that, I think that's where career development will automatically flow through. You don't even have to think specifically about it. I'll let Josephine and Patty talk before you go to the second question.
I just love the idea of the spreading of knowledge as opposed to top down. I made note of that. I'm gonna steal that, Sai. I really love that because that's. I mean, look, I'm Gen X, I guess, 71. Yeah. So I understand. I have experience, yeah, but I don't know everything. And even my experience is really time and based, context focused. So my experience may mean nothing to someone going through a similar situation now, but it's still somewhat valid. So I'm happy to share, but I'm also even more happy to learn from others. So I think acknowledging that kind of the spreading, the back and forth, which I really love. Um, for me, are we going to career skills? The skills for this now, or is that?
You can, yeah, feel
Yeah,
free. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
okay. Well, I think one of the skills that I've made note of in thinking of these questions is um, that I know for me as a Gen X, I my skill gap is probably somewhat in tech, AI possibly, but I think I have good soft skills. So I think I'd like to kind of see the skills kind of spread out a little bit, and maybe the Gen Xers, or not Gen X, the younger the younger generations perhaps need to, or they can learn a bit more soft skills, and we can learn the tech from them. But I also recognize, having said this right now, I'm recognizing that how the different generations socialize is different. So I'm saying soft skills, but I don't even think I don't even think that's the right word. I think it's just understanding how each generation and how people um, uh, communicate beyond their generation is important. And also, I think someone could be technically a Gen X, but in their heart of hearts, they're millennials. So we're not, yeah. So we're not exactly, we can't pigeonhole folks. It's interesting that it's good to have this conversation to understand the general, you know, um, the context behind each generation, but I think it's understanding how everyone's so different. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll pick up from there. I think there's just a lot that, and you mentioned, whether the development needs, but also how the organization can address the differences in people. And I'm going to kind of veer into the stereotypes a little more, although, I think that workplaces, as Cy and Josephine have mentioned, we need to be spreading this knowledge, across, all generations, all, we can't pigeonhole people, right? But I think it's really, also in my experience, I do see real differences in people who are different generational, I guess you would say. So whether or not you fit into that group, to that generation, maybe you fit into the group before more, the group after more, because of your own just personal experiences, however that you got started, in your careers, or move forward. But I think that when you look at people, like in my generation, we've got so many skills now. We put together these things where, we want to lead people, we want to help make decisions. The organizations need to provide those leadership opportunities for us. Now, there are other people in these other generations who also need that, and they need recognition, for doing that. But then I see the next generation after us, kind of the Gen Xers, as being really much more team building thing. We didn't really have this team building thing when I first started out, and then everything became about team building. And I see that as really where I see most of the people who worked for me for many years. They're tech savvy. Whoops, there's a poll you can all answer. I'm not sure there. Anyway, they're tech savvy. They're great at team building. They want flexibility. They want to, have flex time and part time and all that. They like to dress much more casually than I was trained to, when I first started working. And so I think we all have to have that flexible atmosphere that a good organization can provide, and not micromanage people, because I think that's another thing that group really likes, is just a lot more freedom in their team building. And then I see the younger ones, and of course the stereotype is, with the millennials, that they're very entitled, et cetera, like Cy was, saying, but they tend to be the internet learners. And that's where we really started seeing people come to work, and they're just so good on the internet, and they can work really well with everybody across the world, with diverse populations. And, they need to be really given a lot of opportunities to come in and show what they can do and show their talents. And then the Gen Zers that I'm seeing now, I've hired several during the last couple of years. I mean, they tend to be great problem solvers. They're just really focused. They really care about the social mission of the organization they're working for. And that's how I sold them, to come and work for us, because they see that mission thing. So, and they also are really digital. And so we need to have that online, the opportunities for them, and the social cause that stands out, that retain, that creates retention. So I think those are really important aspects that I see, but they really need to go across the whole organization. It's like Cy and Josephine have said, you can't say, okay, these people need this particularly, and maybe they do, but there is that spread that people don't fit in a pigeonhole easily.
Yeah, Sophia, if I can piggyback on Patty's comment, one just use case I can think of is, you can't just, if you're sending out different if you're exploring different communication channels, sending out just a Slack or a Teams message is not, I would say, inclusive enough, for lack of a better word, because there may be a generation of people who would rather prefer in-person conversation. There would be a generation of people who would prefer, just instant message chat is more than some generation would require, text for. So I think finding diverse ways of communication, this ties into what Patty was talking about, having flexibility in that work arrangement. I think that is a very key component to making sure that all the voices are equally weighted, and we make sure that no one is kind of muted for unintentional reasons. Yeah. The other skill that I think this is the skill, the active listening skill that I wanted to talk about. It's true. I think it is irrespective of generation. I think it's just something that each and every professional can and should practice. And I think it holds. I think there's more value, especially in this context of this conversation. Just being able to listen to people. Like we've had this practice run before, and I've learned so much just listening to Josephine and Patty that it's something that it should not be forgotten as we continue to grow professionally.
Yeah, I think you bring up so many good points there. To tie this in, you mentioned communication. All of you at some point mentioned communication. We have a question in the chat, wondering if you guys could talk about some sort of code switching, often necessary when talking between generations. Oh, Josephine, there we go.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here. Yeah, I didn't unmute myself. I've been thinking about this. I don't know. I mean, I think when talking, I think we have to just, number one, start with being authentic, just be ourselves, and understand where that person is coming from and meet them where they're at. So think about the answer from their point of view and try to help answer their question, or help them in whatever way possible. So I'm trying to understand. I guess the code switching is maybe putting me off a little bit. I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. Is that just my intonation, the words I use? Okay, here we go. Gosh, my age is showing. I don't understand. Yeah, Patty.
Yeah, and I kind of have the same reaction to that question, because I think, when you are working with people, I have 28 people who report downline from me, and each person is so different. And when I meet with any one of those, I don't say, okay, now I'm talking with the millennial. I'm talking with that person individually. I'm trying to find out what their goals are, what they want to communicate. I mean, it's an individual communication channel, and I think that's important to have with every person that's on your team. And everybody is different. So and people do cross those different lines of generation pigeonholes. So everybody has something from other generations that's part of them also. So I don't see a sense of needing to code switch, or to think about that, oh, I'm talking to a team builder here. I mean, I may be talking to a great team builder here, and but I'm not thinking, oh, this is a Generation X person, and I need to think of all the other things having to do with Generation X that might fit into our conversation. It's just a one-on-one relationship, and that's, I think, is the basis of how you work with any one person on your teams.
Yeah, I want to flip this again a little bit, because I agree with Josephine and Patty that oftentimes I think in meetings it's not a generational thing. It's more of what individual personalities are. So you want to make sure that the introverts have voice in the room, and not just let the extroverts. So there is a different dimension of thinking of how we deal with voices. Make sure that voices are heard in a meeting room. I don't think it's a generational thing. It's more of what each person brings to the table, and ensuring that people who need to talk have the space and time to talk about it.
Yes, all great points. Thank you. And Sarah also mentioned a great point in the chat here, that code switching originated to describe how Black individuals often have to present themselves to downplay their Blackness in white spaces. So I think that's a really great clarification on the term. And thank you, Sarah, for adding that in the chat. Very helpful. Going back to kind of this generational perspective, Josephine, you mentioned that there being gaps. And Patty, you also talked about, working with the millennials, and Sai also learning across generations. One of the things that organizations I find like to talk about is mentorship. And also one of these ideas that's coming, I think, up and coming in workforces these days is the idea of reverse mentorship. So I'd love to know what role you find mentorship or reverse mentorship play in bridging these gaps in career development that you described. And we can take this to Josephine. I'd love to get your thoughts on this first.
Yeah, sure. I love the concept of reverse mentorship, because I know for me currently I work with a colleague who's 20 years younger than me, and she's wonderful, and I learned so much from her, and I've told her, and I'd like to think she's learning from me as well. So it's kind of nice that we've got this symbiotic relationship, and I think it's important that the organization recognizes that and provides opportunities for different, like, cross collaboration, and not be hesitant to hire someone that's either a lot younger or a lot older, to kind of add to their group, to a team. So, to just be okay with that diversity. Because it sure, man, it really does bring up a lot of different perspectives. It's been really great to. God, I sound very old, but it's just been really great to work with different people, because I learn about them, more importantly, and I also learn about myself. And I kind of recognize some biases or some, oh gosh, I have to work on that. I have to, and I love that. So I think that's really important.
Just to chime in, I love that you mentioned all of that. I think one of the things that comes up is technology around this conversation of reverse mentorship. I know if we look at a lot of universities right now, the experts on AI tend to be the students, and that requires professors having to learn from students. And so it's changed the dynamic of the classroom quite a bit. But I think that's a great example of reverse mentorship happening or occurring in day to day. Excuse me, I'm coming off of a cold, but going on day to day. But yeah, Josephine, did you want to chime in again?
Yeah, sorry. I see in the chat we've got some comment about the code switching and the professional persona and non-professional person. For the record, I just want to say that I would like to dismantle that whole idea of professional versus non-professional persona, and just kind of say be yourself. Yeah, so just, do your homework, think about what you're going to say before you say it, and but at the core, be yourself. And to me, that is the most meaningful that you could be to someone else in general, but especially in work. When you're going for a job interview, when you want to showcase your talent, be yourself. In whatever you're doing, be yourself. There's no particular way to sound. I know that's something that's held me back. I felt like I never sounded articulate enough, eloquent enough. And I had to let all that go and go, look, I'm just myself. I'm learning as I go, and I'm just going to continue to be myself. So I just want to really implore everyone on this call, be yourself. And there's no, I'd like to kind of, let's make this a movement. No professional personal persona. Be yourself. Sorry, I just wanted to address that and what was going on in the chat. Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And I'll chime in, just coming back to mentorship a little then too. I think, that the mentorship is so important. I am very, very passionate about mentorship in both some organizations I'm involved with and at my own organization. And I think that I see that as, as a person who's coming from the boomer age, that's really an important thing for me as part of the process, of just learning across generations, as being part of mentorships. And I've had mentorships of people that are almost the same age as I am, or people that are very different in age. But I think, it's, helping people learn across generations. So I really love to encourage mentorships, between experienced and new team employees and this kind of thing. But I also think that reverse sharing is super, super important, as Josephine's pointed out. I mean, especially with digital technology and AI, um, when the younger, often more digital worker, shares they often have lots of ideas. They share those ideas and those tech options that, that you can, possibly come forward, they can come forward with and suggest. Then in the workplace, it makes me more valuable, as the experienced person, that, can use my knowledge, my leadership skills, my abilities, knowing how these processes, can go through the plans can go through the processes, basically, to make those ideas really come to fruition. So it's such a good team effort opportunity to have, any kind of mentorship, but reverse mentorship, I think, with everything changing so fast, especially in tech, is so important. Go ahead, Sai.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, thank you for all the great comments. I think enough has been said about the advantages of mentorship. I think I myself have been a example of how effective mentorships can be. And I think we are lucky that, talking about publishing ecosystem or the publishing industry as a whole, I think we are lucky that there exists like mentorship opportunities just beyond your own organization. We have organizations like SSP, CSC that I find is like, I come from an academia background where, it's a cutthroat environment there, and their mentorship is pretty much siloed to you and your advisor, maybe, a bunch of your lab mates. And so to be able to approach someone like Patty, or, a CEO of a publishing society, and be able to, have an opportunity to have a conversation is invaluable. Maybe people may not realize it as much as, because we are all part of the industry. I would like to highlight that, and I think it has a great benefit. So, a big shout out to organizations like SSP and CSC, and wherever we can find mentorship opportunities. I think it's so much of benefit to both. And mentorship goes both. They say mentorship goes both ways. I think that is, it cannot is so much truth in that saying. And talking about reverse mentorship, I spoke earlier about knowledge not being a cascading workflow kind of thing. I think that's where reverse mentorship is that kind of mechanism where it enables that knowledge to spread evenly in different directions. I think so that also should be encouraged as much as possible in different settings.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to take a moment to let people know that we are still taking questions from the chat, or in the Q&A. So please feel to drop some questions down in the Q&A. On the topic, or coming off of the topic of mentorship, I'd love to kind of take a broader look at generational differences here as far as what organizations can do. So just given your own thoughts, your own experiences, how do you think organizations, and this doesn't have to be specific to your own, but it could be quite general, how can organizations create a workplace culture that accommodates and respects generational differences? And we can take Patty. I'd love to get you on this.
Okay. Well, I think, again, we've probably touched on a lot of these things, already, but I think, the flexible work arrangements are something that's shown to be very important, part-time, flex time, flex plays, casual dress, all that kind of stuff. And letting people choose maybe whether they want to work in teams or whether they want to work independently. There are a lot of ways you can think of, flexibility, at work. Also, that's also been touched on, but I think it can't be touched on enough. We're here at a C4 disc seminar, and we really need to be intentional about making sure that we have diverse staff. People that can engage with each other, build cross-culturally, productively engage with each other, and if you have an inclusive company culture, every employee feels valued and empowered to do their best and they have psychological safety, and that's just, so important in any workplace. And then one other thing I would comment on was that I think this is something from my organization that I really valued a lot, and that is that our organization really supports the well-being of each employee. That's a major value for us. No matter what generation or culture you are, people will work more productively, if they know that the organization shares the basic values, respect, integrity, their need to have a family life outside of work, and just a respect for their culture or their, wherever they are, in general, that everybody belongs. So I think you have, if you can do things that foster diversity, workplace culture, well-being, and then having open communication channels so that when there are changes, because change is such a big thing in the workplace, when there are changes, have open working, communication channels so that people are filled in and you can communicate well with people so that they can voice their concerns and help run the organization, help be the organization. Your people are your resources that are the organization, right? All right, I'll let somebody else talk.
Yeah, so no, one of the things that came up when you were talking, Patty, is absolutely everything you said, 100%. In addition, those of us in either kind of leadership position, I think we need to model the behavior that we want from our team. So I in my team, I want to create an open environment, a place where, okay, if you make a mistake, not the end of the world. Let's move on. Let's learn. So I'm very open about the mistakes I've made in my team. And so I don't think of it as a matter, something to be shameful of, but I kind of also I share my learning from it too. So by being open about that, I am creating a space for my team and others, my colleagues, etc., to be just as open about what they're doing and the mistakes they've made or the challenges they've had. So I think it can start from leadership in your team. So anyone's on the call here, so just be open about that yourself, and you'll see people will model that. Yeah. So again, living it.
Yeah, the way I thought about this was, as leaders in organizations, what are the questions you would want to think about when you're trying to address this, head on? First thing is, do you have an understanding of how are generations distributed throughout your organization? You know, uh, because that can help you understand if there are pockets of business units which may have the most potential for misunderstandings based on the stereotypes and other things that we've discussed. Then the other question is, are we thinking about generational issues when making hiring decisions, or when we have some sort of reorganizations? When we assign reports to managers, are we thinking about these kind of things? Again, this is in a way to address, like, are we hiring people specifically from a specific generation for a certain role? Then we are not doing justice to ourselves. We're limiting ourselves to a very limited talent pool of people, just based on our own assumptions, I think. And then the other component, I think, which we haven't really discussed much is, how do organizations recognize and acknowledge employees who actually make the effort of creating these intergenerational bonds? I mean, in any organization, giving credit is like a powerful motivation factor. So can we think of any high-profile opportunities that spans like different communication channels? We spoke about different generations having different needs. Can we think about opportunities spanning different communication channels where multi-generational teams, Patty spoke about teams, multi-generational teams or partners, they can share their knowledge and expertise with the whole organization, and that kind of becomes like a template and can potentially be a catalyst for breaking down things if you really want to address these issues head on.
Well said. Yeah, well stated. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good take on this idea of what reward means to different generations. It's almost as I think of it as like a love language. Is it words of affirmation? Is it, acts of service? You get something in return. What exactly does that look like? Not necessarily for generations, but for everyone. What they value, how they interpret reward in return for their work. And I think that's such a great point to bring up. I want to touch on psychological safety because, Patty, you mentioned that. I think that's really important, not just in this conversation around generations, but also, in a workplace in general. I'd love to hear from each of you what that looks like for you in terms of how you facilitate a psychologically safe space, and also what that might look like when working with different generations. We can take this. I know this is not a prepared question, so we can take this to whoever feels ready.
You want to go ahead, or should I? I'll jump in. I think for our organization, what has worked really best is just a lot of communication about it. That it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have a bad day. Everybody has a bad day now and then, but we try not to have bad days all the time. But and be comfortable with that. But it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to to blunder at times. It's okay to miss an appointment, a meeting because something happened and you read your calendar wrong or something like that. And it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. Mistakes are made and everybody is human. And I just think recognizing that human factor, there's a point at which it's not good performance anymore. And then, but I think letting people know that you don't have to be perfect, because I think that gets people really uptight when they think they have to be perfect all the time and they can't say the wrong thing. There need to be processes so that people can, if they say the wrong thing, have corrections, be able to correct themselves and be able to come back and work easily with the rest of the teams again. So, there has to be that sense of the good communication about perfection isn't necessary. Good work is, but perfection isn't. Sometimes things are perfect. I mean, people do perfect work all the time, but it's not something that everybody has to think that they do all the time.
If I can, jump off from Patty's comment, I was in the chemical engineering department when I was doing my postdoc, and one of the engineers' favorite saying was, "You should always have a degree of sloppiness in your work." Or in other words, you should never aim for 100% perfection, because then you're only doing one activity for the rest of your life, trying to hit that 100% perfection. But great point that Patty made. I can't obviously talk for a broader organization, but something that I do as part of my team, I'm a people manager at my organization, and rather than going into a team meeting and say, okay, this is what I expect of you, the very first thing I say is, I will hold myself accountable. Like, just be aware that, like what Patty said, I am prone to mistakes, and don't be afraid to point it out if I'm the person who's made the mistake, and making it clear that I am completely open to hearing feedback as to how to rectify that. It's not just stopping at, okay, I own the accountability part that I have made the mistake, but being able to receive that feedback to become a better person at the end of the day. I think I go with that mindset, and I think if leaders do that, I think that will just automatically spread the word around in the organization. And I think that's my way of looking at psychological safety. Is it starts from us individually, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Support all this. For me, one example of how I exemplified this, or I try to, I was talking to a colleague, and it was getting to be a defensive conversation. I was feeling defensive, and I think she was feeling defensive. And I just kind of said, look, man, I'm feeling defensive. I acknowledged it in the meeting with her. And I'm like, I don't know how well this conversation is going, but I'm feeling really defensive, and I don't want to be. I like you. I like our working relationship. How do we do this better? And acknowledging it, she's like, oh yeah, me too. I feel defensive. And so it really took it down so many notches, and we were able to do solid work and get to the bottom of the issue that we were having. And so just being open and honest about, like, oh, I'm feeling defensive, I didn't check my ego at the door, oh my gosh, like, just being open about that and honest goes a long way. And at the end of the day, you're human, right? And at Canadian Science Publishing, we really, like, we take the people first mentality. If you're sick, you're sick. Take care of yourself. If something's up at home with your family, take care of yourself. That's first. Work won't love you back. There's a book. With that title. And it's true. But you always have to take care of yourself first. And then, and I know as a manager, I do the same with my team. They have to take care of themselves, or else they won't do a good job, right? And so it is that simple, but yet sometimes hard to implement and to, yeah. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you. That was very inspiring by all of you. I think we could pull a quote from each person and put it on a plaque or something. That was brilliant. Thank you. We are coming up on our last few minutes, so I just want to take a moment here to highlight. I think we've spoken on this before, but we all come from different generations. But throughout our conversation, there's so many overlaps and similarities across our wants, our needs within our organizations, and what we want in our career and through our career development. And there's a lot to touch on as far as how we can learn from each other and just continuing this conversation. So I think that's a beautiful thing to come out of this. So thank you all for your wonderful comments. I do just want to close real quick, just to solidify this bridge. What is something that you've learned throughout your career, either from a younger or older generation, that you think someone entering this field that can be publishing, or just entering the workforce in general, should know?
I'd be happy to start out with that.
Yeah, please.
What I've learned, for me, it's really important to work where I care about things, where I care, what goes on. It makes it more than just a job, like Josephine said, it doesn't split the personal and the professional. But I think really, no matter what generation you come from, or whether you bridge a bunch of different generations or whatever, I think it's important to realize that all people really want the same thing. They want respect, I think it's important to respect and trust your employees. And instead of focusing on all the differences, think in terms of what you really want to do. Think in terms of the results, you know, the deadlines, the goals, the mission that gets everybody engaged. Really, having a common purpose is, I think, the key. Everybody wants meaning in their life. They want a reason for commitment. I know at the AAN, everyone feels a sense of commitment toward our goal of helping patients' lives be better, and we want, they want to work with people they trust and they care about. And so I think, especially as a leader, you need to trust and care about your team members, and it will become a self-feeding mechanism where everyone cares for each other, where you're all working toward the same mission and goals. And it doesn't matter what your age is or what generation you're coming from, and that mutual respect and care for each other.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Patty. Sai, love to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think the way I think about this is, and this is true for any generation, it doesn't have to be millennial specific. We heard from Patty, we heard from Josephine about, the struggles they went through in going from point A to point B. And they're going to be those struggles for each and every generation. I think what's important for future generations is to not take things for granted, to remember the history of where we have, what has taken for each of us as a society, as a as humanity in general, to come to a certain point. And the point when we take those things for granted, the point when we lose the history of how we have come, is the point where we're not doing justice to ourselves, and there's a point where progress will come to a standstill. I think that's the most important lesson that each and every generation needs to remember, if you want to head in the right direction in the future.
Amazing. Thank you. Josephine?
Yeah.
Close us out.
Yeah, no. I mean, one of the lessons that I've learned is to and I'm Italian. I'm a very emotional person, and I've learned over time to contain that emotion. And I'm not saying when you've got feelings or when you've got emotions to kind of stifle them, but use those emotions as an indicator to kind of tell you, okay, what do you need to research? Right? You don't have to lead with your emotion, but you can use your emotions in your job and to go for it. Do your homework, do the research. When you're giving an opinion, get some data behind it. Just do the homework, do the work behind what you're saying. And one of the things, it's to kind of marry the gut and the homework and the work, so they both go together, and one is not more important than the other. They do need to work together. And for me, it's go for it. If you're listening to this and you're not sure about a job, to go for a job, I don't know, I don't have the skills, or I don't have enough experience, all that, go for it, stretch. You'll learn along the way. You may or may not get the job, but it's always about the journey. And that's something that I've learned along the way. It really is about the process, and so trust it. And yeah, trust the process more than the outcome. That's something that I've taken with me. Thanks.
Yeah, I love that. Trust the process more than the outcome. That's amazing. Thank you so much. All right. Well, we are just about at time. We'll give people a minute or so back. I just want to thank everyone for joining the Bridging Intergenerational Experiences webinar. As a reminder, the recording will be available on the C4 Disc YouTube channel in the coming days. So please share with anyone who couldn't attend today. And finally, thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Sai. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was lovely to have this conversation. I hope everyone took away something positive from this time together. All right. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Sophia, as well.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.